what's next is an international intercomparison. This project was initiated by Cora and the process and data was managed by Pam Warkentin. I hope I didn't say that incorrectly, Pam, of AARST in Canada. Jose, oh, why are these hard names? Garrigus, Villanueva, and Melinda Ronca-Battista, which is a QA expert here in the US, as they share a worldwide intercomparison project to evaluate current reference atmospheres of primary and tertiary radon chambers internationally. Pam is a founding member of AARST and a CNRPP certified measurement professional. Pam is now the executive director of AARST and CNRPP. Jose Luis is a specialist radon measurement advisor at Radon-Nova Laboratories in Sweden. Very nice. And a research founding member of ERA, which is European Radon Association. The third member of this research team is Melinda Ronca-Battista. All right, guys, thank you so much for hopping in. I'll go ahead and let you take it away.
So this is going to be fast, but briefly, the idea of this project is to compare standard radon concentrations in different calibration and reference facilities all around the world. So one thing that people who are not really familiar with how radon calibration chambers work don't know is the difficulty of basically calculating radon concentrations based on radon gas emanating from radium-226 sources mixed with a known volume of air. This is done in terms of estimating the radon gas coming off of the radium-226 and estimating the volume of air that radon gas is diluted into. We don't have a standard radon concentration like you can for other pollutants, for example, benzene and different pollutants. If for those types of pollutants, there's a magic standard, the gold standard, and everybody compares to that. That's not possible for radon because, of course, it's radioactive and continuously decaying, so you can't ship like a standard cylinder of radon gas around the country like you can for other pollutants. So this project is basically to compare the concentrations in different calibration and reference laboratories in different radon chambers all over the world. And so you could see here that on the left, it describes the project, which is basically to take 3 alpha guards, like I have behind my shoulder here, and ship them like the traveling trio of little elves that go from country to country, continent to continent, and radon calibration chambers that want to participate can expose this set of 3 alpha guards. And then basically everybody compares against what the average of those 3 alpha guards say the true concentration is. And this is really necessary because right now, everybody does their own calibrations. They get their equipment, which is calibrated according to however that manufacturer does the calibrations. But we need to be sure that when we say there's a picocurie per liter of radon gas in Canada, which actually we don't, we say there's 137 becquerels per cubic meter. But when we say there's a concentration, say, of 800 becquerels per cubic meter in Canada, that means the same thing, plus or minus some level of uncertainty, right? With the same concentration measured in a chamber in the US, or measured in Sweden, or measured in Australia. So the scope of the project is to compare, to generate numerical comparisons of how well these different chambers agree with one another. Also to assemble a database, because these chambers are super cool. Some are based just upon natural radioactivity that's in the ground. Some are based on solid sources. And right now, this is just part of the database that's being assembled that describes the characteristics of these different chambers. And you can see that some of them are walk-in chambers, others are much smaller. The picture in the upper left with the Kulo orange chamber is one of the 2 chambers in the Czech Republic. And you could see, like in the bottom right picture, there are 3 alpha guards together, essentially measuring the same thing, the concentration in that chamber over that exposure duration. This is a short talk, but the punchline is really, really good, because the 3 of us were kind of worried, right? What would happen if it turns out there's a big difference? The concentrations that Germany says is in their chamber, when we compare it with the standard, which is these 3 alpha guards that have been going all over the globe measuring radon concentration. What if Germany says their concentration is 20% different than, for example, Bowser-Morner? That would be really bad. We would have to make sure that we do everything super carefully in terms of releasing the information. And the chamber operators would have to go back and really assess their calculations. The good news, we don't have all the data yet. The good news is that every chamber agrees with every other chamber who's participated so far within 10%. In fact, some of the chambers, it almost seems like too perfect. Like, could this data have been faked? These chambers agree with one another within a few percentage points. So this is really a testimonial to the engineers, like Phil Jenkins there, who's getting his webcam set up, and Rebecca and the other chamber operators who do these calculations. They work so carefully with their chambers, looking at the levels of leaks, flow rates, etc. And this is a very, very good news story, and we look forward to the next possible opportunity to presenting the actual results. I do want to add that the data are confidential. For those chambers who have participated, we work with that chamber individually, and nobody's data will be released without them providing the okay. So far, it's all fantastic news. We'd love to get questions if we have time, but I know that we've got a lot to do in this 1 hour. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And please ask questions in the chat or however is appropriate.
All right, thank you both, or excuse me, all 3 of you so much. And thank you again for jumping in. All right, Dr. Jenkins and Rebecca, are we ready to go?
Yes, I think we are.
All right.
Okay, one second.
All right, well, we are all looking forward to the tour of the chamber. So Rebecca, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Good luck.
Awesome, thanks.
All right, you got it. You got
Great.
it. Just be sure to mute yourself.
My name is Rebecca Turek. I am the manager of the Radon Reference Laboratory at Bowser-Morner. We are really excited to have everyone here. We don't typically get a whole lot of our clients in the lab with us. So let's let everyone stay safe and healthy. We're also going to show you around. So this is Big Blue, as we call it here in the lab. We have 2 chambers, and this one allows us to do calibrations. We also offer spiking and performance testing. We do a little bit of research and device evaluations as well, but the main purpose of this chamber is to provide calibration of continuous radon monitors. So the concentration, percent relative humidity, and temperature are constant throughout the year. This setup allows us to control the percent relative humidity. It's pretty cool. It's just flows hot and cold water. It's our custom built HVAC system, which I could take up an hour talking about. But we'll move on to the counting system for radon, which Phil is going to tell you about.
Hi, I'm Phil Jenkins. As you've heard from Rebecca, one of the things we do here is calibrate radon monitors. And we calibrate quite a variety that range from responses of 3 to even higher than 100 counts per hour per picocurie per liter. And therefore, our monitoring system on our chambers has to have a response that's at least 4 times the highest of anything that we calibrate. So we use a system that consists of 3 scintillation cells that look like, each one of them looks like this. It's 1.4 liter, and it sits on a 5-inch photomultiplier tube. These are very, very similar system to what was used at the former EPA chambers and the former Department of Energy chambers. And together, using the average of 3 of these, we achieve a response from about 750 to 800 counts per hour per picocurie per liter. So how do we know that what we're getting from this system is accurate? Well, once a year, we send cells that look like this one to the National Analytical Radiological Environmental Laboratory, which is the EPA laboratory in Montgomery, or NARL for short. So when we send the cells to NARL, they fill them with a reference concentration of radon, which is the primary reference at that point, and send them back to us. We analyze them and we send our results to the certification programs, and we have to be within 10% of the reference value that EPA provides. And ever since NARL has been doing this, every time we've been within about 1%, which is just excellent. So then periodically, we take grab samples from both of our chambers, and we compare the grab sample from using the secondary standard cells to the reading that's coming from the continuous system. So we make sure that both of those systems are in good agreement. So we have confidence that our chamber values that we report and that we calibrate monitors to is accurate, because it traces back to the secondary standard, which traces back to the primary standard, which is provided by the EPA.
So this counts the radon concentration, but our monitoring system actually translates it over into numbers that we can work with. Our IT department put this program together, and it allows us to see the averages every 5 minutes for each of those 3 cells that Phil just told you about, as well as the overall average. And then we can also monitor the humidity and the temperature as well. So this is pretty cool, and it allows us to stay on top of it, all the time. So now I will show you the sources, and this is actually where all of the radon in the chambers come from. We have one on the chamber and one for the blue chamber, and then we have 2 for the brown chamber, and we'll go out there in a few minutes. But I would say 2 of the most common questions that we get are, one, what Phil just talked to you about, which is how do we know that we actually have as much radon in the chamber as we say we do? But 2, we're in the business of preventing people's exposure to radon. So how do you do this in a way that keeps your team safe when you've got these huge chambers full of it? We definitely follow AARST. We, time distance shield. So we wrap all of our sources in lead, which does a really good job. I survey them frequently to make sure that, we're not seeing leaks, that the concentration doesn't start click, 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 click as soon as I walk over here. What else do? We have 2 mitigation systems for the lab, which helps to keep, when we're not in the chamber, it keeps, the outside workspace very low. And then again, we only allow our team members to go into the chamber once a day in the morning, and then that's, what they're exposed to. Additionally, we do monitor everyone who is going in and out of the chambers. This one monitors our team every month, and then this one monitors our team every quarter to make sure that, we're not being exposed to more here than, we are at home. So that is how we keep our team safe. So we just walked around the blue calibration chamber. So now I'd like to take you guys to the other end of the building where we can show you the original tan chamber. Phil actually put this together around 30 years now, 30 years ago. Oh, hey, Clint. This is Clint. He fixes all of my problems. And so all the technology that we have here is based off of the original work that Phil did. Hey, Phil, you want to say hi? So back here, we'll do electrical checks and background checks before they go into the blue chamber. That pretty much wraps up, the calibration section. The original brown chamber, here we are in all of its glory. This one differs from the blue chamber because we change the temperature, the percent relative humidity, and the radon concentration. So this one's different about every week, whereas, again, the blue one's gonna stay the same consistently throughout the year. That one's dedicated solely to calibrations, whereas over here we're gonna be doing spikes, special requests, and performance tests. Okay, now let's take a quick trip inside the chamber so you guys can see what part of the average day at the Bowser Motor Radon Reference Lab is like. Okay, so we have 2 doors here. This allows us to mitigate the effect of opening the door so that the concentration stays as stable as is possible. Again, the concentration's higher in there, so I'm gonna kind of give you a brief overview so that way Jacob and I are in the chamber for as short a period as is possible. So we're in the anteroom. This allows us to control the amount of time that the amount of flow in and out. Definitely mitigates that effect there. What I want everyone to notice while we're in the chamber is the shelving units. We can fit a lot in there. That's definitely, the fact that this is a walk-in chamber is certainly one of the things that differentiates us from the other chambers out there. Jacob and I will be in there, we'll be walking around. That's definitely notable. We can fit a lot of devices in there. I also, you might not be able to see it, but one of the things that Phil talked to you guys about was that counters and how we have 3. So we've got 3 different spots where we're pulling air so that we can make sure that the concentration is uniform throughout the entire chamber. So if I've got, a packet of charcoal here and a packet of charcoal on the other side of the chamber, you're gonna have, uniform concentration. They're gonna be getting that same exposure. So we will go in. We're gonna be really snappy about it. Here we go. the other really cool thing that we like about the chambers that we have here are the windows, so we can see out and we can see in when we are working in the chamber. So they're set up the same way. So the blueprints, it's the exact same thing, not the exact same thing, but it's very similar, the brown to the blue. So that covers the inside of the chamber. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us and coming on a tour of our lab. And hopefully you can come visit us in person sometime.
To schedule your next test, head to www.bowser-morner.com. Select Laboratory Services, go down to the Radon Reference Lab, click on the test you need, and fill out your form. Once you click Submit, we will email you your work agreement as soon as possible.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins and Rebecca. I'm so glad we were able to get the technical difficulties worked out, and we were able to have an opportunity to share this with everyone in attendance today. So thank you very, very much. All right. Well, just hang by because I'm sure we have lots of questions. Just hang in there with us. So last but not least, we will hear from EPA team leader John Griggs, and then Sam Poppell will be joining him for Q&A at the end. The topic is report on the EPA radon reference. John has worked at the EPA's National Analytical Radiation Environmental Laboratory for almost 30 years. He is currently NAREL's lab director and has a PhD in chemistry. Welcome, John and Sam.
Thank you, Don. So let me share my presentation here. Just want to confirm that everyone...
Got it, John. You're there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank
So I
you.
apologize. I do not have my camera's not working on my computer. I apologize for that. So I'm going to give an overview of EPA's Radon Reference and Intercomparison Program, or ERIP for short, and thank goodness for acronyms. And Phil mentioned this in the virtual tour of Bowser-Morner. As always, have to start out with the standard disclaimer when you're EPA. So any reference to any commercial product, process, or service does not imply its endorsement by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And the lawyers like for us to do that. So I want to kind of briefly start with an overview of NAREL. NAREL is EPA's only radiological laboratory in the country. We serve as the agency center of excellence for laboratory radiological environmental measurements and related technical support on a national basis. NAREL's goal really is to serve as a reference laboratory and be the gold standard of environmental radiological measurements. We don't seek to compete with the commercial sector, but rather to complement the commercial sector. Now, NAREL is currently serving a reference laboratory role in the Radon Reference Intercomparison Program, or ERIP program. So that's a very good fit for us, one that we'd like to serve. The next two slides really provide a brief overview of EPA's radon measurement programs over the years. So from 1986 up until about 1995, EPA managed two national proficiency programs for companies involved in radon measurements. The two programs were merged in 1995 to form the National Radon Proficiency Program, or NRPP. And then 3 years later, in 1998, the NRPP was privatized. It's now operated by the AARST National Radon Proficiency Program and the National Radon Safety Board. But over the years, EPA has maintained a QA role. And again, I think that's the proper role for EPA to play. And we're very happy to serve in that capacity. So ERIP was really kind of the latest iteration, I guess, of that QA role, is the only governmental NIST traceable radon reference and calibration program that's accessible to commercial radon chambers and the US radon industry. So ERIP, the program itself, offers services to the AARST National Radon Proficiency Program, the National Radon Safety Board, and any state radon programs. So since the establishment of ERIP in around 2017, it was transferred from our sister facility in Las Vegas. NARO has performed 11 radon intercomparisons with secondary radon chambers. So for the remainder of my presentation, I really can't cover every aspect of this program, but I really want to focus on a brief overview of the process that we use at NARO to produce scintillation cells with a reference value traceable to NIST of radon concentrations for intercomparisons. So we'll start with the key to it all, the radon standards. So our standards are prepared in what are called bubbler flasks. I think most people are familiar with these, by our quality assurance chemists. And here's a picture of the bubbler flask that we use here at NARO. The radium-226 standard solution is used for the calibration of photomultiplier tubes and scintillation cells, and very importantly, for the production of radon gas standards that are prepared as a derived standard from a certified reference material traceable to NIST. So in terms of really how we make up these standards, the mass of the radium-226 solution transferred into bubblers is measured gravimetrically, as this is a much more accurate way of measurement. And that way we can minimize the uncertainty. All of this really, everything we do is aimed at minimizing the uncertainty of that reference value. So where possible, a relative uncertainty of the mass measurement of 0.1% or less is the target. So we make every effort to minimize this. So once prepared, the bubbler flask is sealed and it's stored long enough to allow for radon to come to cyclic equilibrium with the radium-226. At least 40 days, we're at 99.95%. These are, we can calculate that equilibrium. But then, of course, we have to verify that standard. So the radium-226 standard is verified by comparison to another radium-226 standard that's an independent standard, different lot number, if you will, either directly from the US's National Metrology Institute, which is, of course, NIST, or National Metrology Institute of Germany or Great Britain. So we have another standard by which we verify this. That's a fairly elaborate process, which I really can't, unfortunately, go into today. So now I'm going to focus on the process for the deamination of a known concentration of radon from that bubbler flask that has a NIST traceable solution into scintillation cells. So to start the process, we have an accurately known volume of mass of water in what we call flask 1 is siphoned into flask 2. Here's just a picture of flask 1, and hopefully you can see that it is situated on a balance. So we can actually measure how much was siphoned into flask 2. The water from flask 1 is used to displace an accurately known volume of radon-free air, which is saturated with moisture, of course, from flask 2, which you can see here along with, you can see flask 2 here, and you can see an airflow meter and a pressure meter, very small pictures of those in that picture there. So this displaced air, where we know the volume very accurately from flask 2, then passes through the radon emanation bubbler flask, and then it quantitatively purges a known amount of radium-222 from the solution in the bubbler. And you can see in this picture here, I know it's relatively small, but you can see the tubing going into the bubbler flask, and we have this known volume of air from flask 2. Now, the moist air from the bubbler flask passes through a drying tube containing anhydrous calcium sulfate. That's really to remove the moisture. And that's collected in an evacuated Tedlar bag as you can see in the picture here, the Tedlar bag in the second picture on the slide. So the Tedlar bag is maintained at ambient pressure and temperature. It's a 10-liter bag. The bag is manually manipulated and allowed to mix for at least 30 minutes. This is to ensure a uniform distribution of radon in the bag, kind of just a physical process, actually. So this next slide really takes all the components that we've just discussed in the previous 3 slides and just puts it into one diagram, which I think is kind of helpful. Otherwise, you have individual pictures. So the activities really proceed from left to right and have been discussed. And so I won't go into detail again, but you'll see that flask 1's position there. We have the balance. Certain mass of water we measure is siphoned into flask 2. That displaces a known volume through calculation of radon-free air that passes through the pressure meter, the mass flow meter, and then into the bubbler flask, which then emanates the radon through the drying tube into the Tedlar bag. So, I mean, there are a lot of details into the process, but this gives you a nice overview of a process. It's a seal system. Prior to this, it's purged with ultra pure air to get rid of any radon that's just naturally occurred, maybe in the water, for example. So really now it's a matter of transferring the radon from the Tedlar bag into scintillation cells. And for that, we use a vacuum transfer manifold. Not the best picture, but I think you can kind of see a little bit of it there. You can see the manifold there. It's already attached to 8 scintillation cells. So the radon is transferred from the Tedlar bag to the evacuated manifold assembly, and then from there to the evacuated scintillation cells by opening the appropriate valves and filling up the scintillation cells. There's always more volume in the bag than can fill the cells, so we have an ample amount of that. So importantly, the concentration of radon in the Tedlar bag at a specified reference time is calculated as a quotient of the known activity of radon-222 transferred from the bubbler flask and the volume of air used to perform that transfer. So we do a lot of corrections, calculations, because obviously the volume and activity are critical to the reference value. So the calculated volume of radon is based on the measurement of the volume of air displaced by the mass of water flowing from flask 1 to flask 2. So a number of small corrections to the mass of water leaving flask 1 are performed to account for things like water density, which is of course based on temperature, buoyancy, which is based on temperature, density, and humidity, and any overpressure in the apparatus prior to the bubbler. So again, our goal is to reduce uncertainties to this very smallest value we can. In addition, the volume calculated from displaced water is also corrected to account for a decrease in volume resulting from drying, because the gas stream before it goes to the Tedlar bag passes through a dry trap, which captures the moisture before it fills the Tedlar bag. And that was shown in the preceding diagram. So we've tried to make sure we account for virtually all sources of uncertainty to the extent that we can. Now that volume correction may seem small, but it's due to the drying of the gas stream, and it's based on the fact that the change in mass in the moisture trap, really, which we weigh, is just a result of the absorption of moisture in the tube. We're going to get that with the system that we have. So the mass of water removed is converted to a volume of water vapor at the ambient temperature and barometric pressure at the time of the transfer. And of course, the volume of radon is adjusted accordingly. In addition, a correction is applied to the volume of gas delivered to the Tedlar bag to account for any change in ambient temperature or barometric pressure that occurs during that transfer of gas from the Tedlar bag distillation tube. Although it doesn't take a particularly long time, you will have obviously some change potentially in temperature or barometric pressure during that time. So we do calculations based on that as well. So hopefully you can see that there's a significant amount of time and effort that goes into determining very accurate values for both the volume and activity of radon gas that's transferred into the scintillation cells for the intercomparisons. Then ultimately, the scintillation cells are counted using photomultiplier tubes that are connected to multi-channel analyzers. The key, though, of course, is making sure that we know the actual concentration of radon in those scintillation cells. So I'm going to really briefly discuss the counting of the scintillation cells and the types of cells we call them. Background measurements of scintillation cells are determined prior to analytical measurements. And background gives obviously a very good sense of kind of what's going on with the system or what's going on with the cells. In addition, we also run method blanks, which they're taken through the entire process that we've just looked at, except for the introduction of radon. We don't go through the bubbler because then it's not a method blank at that point. And they're analyzed prior to analytical measurements. The comparison of background measurements to method blanks is really important as well. That really tells you, do you have some very, very tiny amount of radon that you need to account for by comparing those two numbers. Now, the standards themselves are analyzed and calibration factors are calculated that, of course, relate the alpha emission rate to the activity of radon in each of the scintillation cells. So each scintillation cell, if you will, whether it's a background cell or a method blank or a standard, are counted 16 times sequentially, each count lasting an hour. And that, of course, is to really optimize our measurement statistics by doing that number of measurements. So given our reference role in this program, really a large amount, frankly, the bulk of the amount of time we spend is dedicated to quality control activities. And I can't cover all of them. There's another presentation that is just on that, and that's about 20 slides. But I'll briefly discuss just some of these QC activities. The photo multiplier, QC checks, backgrounds, blanks, calibrations, verification standard, method validation, standard revalidation analysis. These all must meet stringent requirements, and the results are reviewed by several people. Of course, we do statistics on that. As I mentioned, the calibration standard itself is verified by comparison to another radium-226 standard obtained from a second independent standard from a national metrology institute, such as NIST. Now, there are numerous statistical checks that are performed on measurement data. We have a statistician at our lab that does those kinds of analyses. The photomultiplier tube responses check using hot cells and control charts on a very regular basis. Obviously, you have to make sure that's operating properly. The balance that's used to measure the mass of water that is siphoned from flask 1 into flask 2 is checked each day of use, and it's calibrated with NIST traceable standards. We also have NIST traceable instruments to record pressure, temperature, humidity, and these undergo an annual calibration that is NIST traceable, so we maintain that NIST traceability. And we have 4 levels of data review to make sure that our data is, reliable, defensible, and so forth. So there's nothing that gets through 4 levels of data review at our lab, I can assure you. The last slide kind of gives an overview of the actual in a comparison. So a participant would submit 4 empty scintillation cells to narrow. And then we'll go through the process that we just described, and we'll produce the radon sample with a confirm a reference value. And then, of course, we'll put that into those scintillation cells, and then we return the filled cells as single blinds back to the participant. At about the same time, we submit the reference value to the accrediting organization. And then, of course, the participant will analyze the 4 cells, and they will submit their results to the accrediting organization. And that organization then evaluates the results. EPA does not evaluate the results. The criteria are that each result has to be within 25% of the EPA reference value, and the average of the 4 results has to be within 10% of the reference value. Now, to date, the results have been well within these values. As Phil noted for Bowser-Warner, I mean, they were within 1%, which is a phenomenal agreement, actually, when you're talking about measurements. So we've gotten across the board with our participants, really exceptional agreement with our values. And that's obviously, obviously a very good sign of very good measurements being performed. So the last slide really is some contact information. This program resides in Sam Poppell's center, and he's the expert in radon measurements. I'm happy to give the presentation, but Sam has an extensive background. I know many of you know Sam. And there's my information, and I'm, of course, the lab director, and proud to have this program in our laboratory. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, John. We really appreciate it. All right, we are going to open it up for some Q&A. So it looks like a lot of people have some questions. So let's go ahead and invite all of our panelists back so we can get those questions answered.
Okay, there are two in the Whova Q&A. First one from Bill Field. I see there's a website for COIRA. Is there also an electronic newsletter that provides updates or on activities of COIRA?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, there is a website, and we are planning to send, first of all, the information to the participants. But no, we don't have such a newsletter so far.
Okay. Next question is from Gloria. And I think it was entered during your presentation, John Griggs. How is the radon acquired?
How is the radon acquired? I mean, basically the process that I described where we bubble a known volume of gas through the radium-226 solution that produces the radon into the Tedlar bag. I'm not sure otherwise how to answer the question. I mean, of course, the radon is produced from the decay of radium-226 in that bubbler flask.
Okay, did anybody else have any opinion on that question? That maybe something you said triggered it?
Sam, can you weigh in on that?
Unless the individual is asking the question, where do we get the sources from? From NIST, and that's in government speak, is that, you know, we have to do a purchase order to acquire those sources from NIST or from Germany or England.
Okay, and then let's see, there's a question about WLM asked earlier by Nate. Is there reference chamber traceability for working levels? And I know that Jose answered that, but then there's another question, same subject, asking Bowser Warner, is your chamber equipped to calibrate WLM as well as other techniques and instrumentation? So why don't you take that away, Bowser Warner people?
Phil, are you there? I know you had an interest in discussing that. Are you here?
It looks like Phil dropped off.
Phil's dropped off. Okay. So currently, we are not. That is something that's in the works. I would say maybe in 6 months, ask me again. But at this point, we're not doing working level monitors.
Jane, are there any other questions maybe you can ask?
You know, Melinda kindly answered the question about whether requirements for calibration are annual, and mentioned that she had addressed that in her slides if somebody wants to download those. So if anybody had that question, you were looking for Melinda's slides. And there was another question from related to WLM, which I'm afraid we really need Phil for as well. Can someone unmute Phil, or here we go, maybe I can do it.
I've been trying. He needs to try from his side.
Okay.
All right.
While we're waiting for that, I'd just like to say, for those of you who are in attendance and perhaps haven't been in the radon world for as long as some of us, this is kind of an all-star cast we have here with John and Sam Poppell, who's been working at NERL for a long time and is one of my favorite people, and Jose Luis and Melinda and Pam. We're really fortunate here, Dr. Jenkins, to kind of show us what's going on, and you can see how important this whole process is. That you know, one of the reasons why AARST is so active in lobbying at Capitol Hill, not only for you know, keeping the funding for the radon program and you know, doing the things we do there, but also to make sure that the NERL lab keeps funded. If we don't have the NERL lab, then the participants that John was referring to, which are the primary chambers like Bowser Warner and the lab that Bruce runs at KSU, and the lab in Canada, and there with Luis, the ones across the world, don't have that opportunity to intercompare with the program that Melinda was describing through COIRA. So all of this works together, and us supporting it is really an important part of what we do.
I see that Phil's up again. Phil, we have some questions for you.
He needs to be made co-host.
Oh.
Got it. You should be on, Phil. We can hear you whisper.
I'm back. I'm back.
Great, excellent, excellent.
Yay!
So there were several working level monitor questions. I'm going to read them all again. And is there a reference chamber traceability for working levels? Is it even feasible? That was from Nate. And I want to note that Jose Luis replied that he believes that BFS in Germany has this feature. And then there's also a question, what is the time around to get calibration on WLM? And Rebecca's already answered that your chamber is not equipped to calibrate WLM. And you're a little bit of time out from that, but if you could answer these WLM questions, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, part of the problem is that once EPA had no chambers for WLM for us to intercompare with, we have no intercomparison to a higher power, so to speak, intercomparing with a national reference. However, we still do a performance testing for the dosimeters that the Canadian miners in Saskatchewan wear. In fact, I just got finished doing that. I'm also on working with the committee on ANSI N13.8. In fact, I just missed a meeting of it because of this meeting. And that standard is radiation measurements in uranium mines. And so the lack of a national reference has really put a hurt on that standard. So I think I think what's finally going to happen is that we're going to hang our hat on a standard methodology rather than an intercomparison. And so, yes, could we calibrate a WLM? Yeah, but we're not certified to do so. And we frankly feel a little precarious at the moment with doing any WLM work.
Okay. I have another question for Sam or John about EPA. When do you anticipate being able to conduct intercomparisons again?
Yeah, I'll take this one. COVID has been quite difficult for us. The agency has grading criteria, phases 0, 1, 2, and 3 for reopening. We've not met the criteria in our area for phase 0. So that's not a good sign. So I will tell you that it's unfortunate at this time, I'm not able to predict when we will be back in the lab, not only for the radon comparisons, but doing all the other work that NERL is responsible for doing. And frankly, as we're all aware, numbers are going up nationally, and for whatever reason, in our particular area, it has been a significant problem. So I wish I could give you a date. I'm sorry, I just cannot at present.
So a follow-up question on that. Has the federal government looked into getting an exception for this essential service?
EPA is not going to require employees to come into the office until they've met certain criteria that is considered safe, and we've not met that criteria.
Okay, I think that, and wait a minute, there's something else here. Hold on a second. All right, I think that's it for the questions that I can see. Thank you so much for everyone's responses.
Yes, thank you very much for being here with us today. I've been wanting to, been talking to Dr. Jenkins about putting all this together for a while, and I'm glad even with the technical difficulties, we were able to to get it shown to everyone. So thank you very much for your participation.